Out of an oppressive history comes a nation proclaiming to be a rainbow people, including African people, the Zulu, Xhosa, San, and Khoi. Also European people, the Afrikaner and English, and finally South Asian, Malay, and colored, a mixture of people with different hues and colors. Cape Town, at the southern tip of Africa, is today a modern city, European in appearance, with tall buildings, broad boulevards, and a mixture of people, primarily colored and European, a majority of whom speak Afrikaner as their first language. The southern tip of Africa, where the Indian and Atlantic Oceans mix, is a stormy area. The first Europeans to appear here were Bartholomew Diaz, followed by Vasco da Gama. Both were Portuguese sailors searching for a way to the spices of India. Despite the stormy seas, they named this southern tip of Africa the Cape of Good Hope. Today, the Cape of Good Hope is a popular tourist destination, but when Vasco da Gama came across this area, it was lightly populated. When the Dutch East India Company established Cape Town as a supply center, the Cape was inhabited primarily by penguins and the people known as the San. The San was a hunter-gatherer culture. The San no longer exist, but the African penguins still survive. The San people either intermixed with the European invaders or were enslaved or killed defending their land. All that remains of the San identity are rock art and proverbs.
In this place is power, God's power, the power of our grandfathers. This is the world that stands here. Thus we are empowered.
The Dutch East India Company took over the Asian spice trade from the Portuguese and created a fortress city, Cape Town, to facilitate their trade. Cape Town became a supply port, providing meat, grain, and vegetables to the Indian and Spice Island or Indonesian-bound ships. The British soon dominated the Asian spice trade, and in 1806 took permanent control of Cape Town from the Dutch. Cape Town society was a province of immigrants, Dutch and English, Malays, Africans from Madagascar or Angola, and a mixed or colored population. Malays and Africans came as involuntary enslaved immigrants. The Dutch had needed labor, and they bought African slaves from Portuguese slave traders. The Dutch also brought in people from Malaysia and Indonesia to labor as slaves, the Malays. The English continued slavery. Langa Township, outside Cape Town, is a remnant of apartheid, the separation of races that grew out of slavery. Bokop is an area originally inhabited by freed Malay slaves who were restricted to what was then an undesirable place to live. Today it has been gentrified and is an attractive place to live. The Malay brought brightly colored buildings and Islam to Cape Town. Modern Cape Town lies at the base of the always-present iconic Table Mountain. One can ascend the 3,000 feet to the top of Table Mountain by trail or by gondola. We chose the gondola. On the summit of Table Mountain are found rabbit-like animals called dassies, and they are related to elephants. Also on the slopes of Table Mountain are the world-famous Kirstenbach National Botanical Gardens, showcasing South African flora. A common South African plant is the protea. The Griqua, a non-tribal group of former African slaves and colored, became refugees from the Khoi dominance of the Western Cape. They fled to the high veld interior to raise cattle. The Griqua became Christian and, like the white Boer trekkers, were part of the Great Trek. In the 1830s, Dutch descendants called the Afrikaners began the Great Trek to the High Veld, or Plains. It was a migration of small family groups seeking land for pasturage and farming. In the Veld, on their march to Pretoria, the Boer truckers invaded the African pastoral-based communities. They soon came into conflict with various African communities. Foremost among the African communities were the Xhosa and the Zulus. The Zulus, a tribal group of the Nguni people, lived in round houses that the Afrikaners called rondavels. Under King Shaka, 1787 to 1828, the Zulus were organized into a military power, extending their control over 300 tribes in western South Africa. The Xhosa were less warlike and sought a political solution. Their language is noted for its clicks, which are used for emphasis.
I love you, Kadianitanda Kakulu. Igqirha lendlela nguqongqothwane sele qabele gqithapha hayi nguqongqothwane sele qabele gqithapha kuthiwa nguqongqothwane. I love you guys. Enjoy your time in South Africa.
The Zulus were defeated by the Afrikaners at the Battle of Blood River in 1838. The victory established Afrikaner control of the High Veld and of the Natal. The Natal had been a British province, and following the British withdrawal in the 1850s, the Boers created their own republics. Griqua and Xhosa lands were also seized by the Boers. The Swazi and Lesotho people living in the less desirable mountainous lands were able to maintain their political and cultural independence. At a Swazi cultural event, the males perform a very athletic traditional dance. Males and females dance separately. While maintaining the ethnic culture, Swaziland, ruled by a very wealthy king, remains a poor country economically. African religion varies from the indigenous shamanistic to a variety of Christian faith expressions. Our bus driver describes the African shaman tradition.
I want you to tell me again what a shaman does.
He cures anything.
Cures anything.
Yes. And he can, like he says, he can cure jealousy.
Jealousy?
If you have problems in your marriage, he can cure that.
Your marriage problems?
Potions and mixtures. You can make somebody fall in love with you or make you fall in love with somebody.
And how about that other man's wife?
Yes, he can be like another man's wife. He'll mix you a potion which you must give to her and she can make her fall in love with you. There we go. He cures all manners of things. Even if it's a job you desire, he will mix something for you that will make you get that job. That's what he says.
That's what he says.
I don't believe him though.
have you ever had a shaman that you paid and it didn't work?
I've never ever used the such.
The Zulu Xhosa concept of Ubuntu adds an African communal dimension to Christianity. I am because you are.
African religion, as multiple and complex as is any other religion, is community, ancestors, and tradition. In ultimate form, the African person is a person through other people. Bishop Desmond Tutu.
Swaziland singers perform Amazing Grace, a song with both African and American roots. A huge reef of gold, the largest deposit in the world, was discovered in 1886 at Burke's Lucky Potholes. With the high velt now suddenly having acquired great value, the British sought to regain their control over the Afrikaner Boers. The Afrikaners lost the resulting Boer or South African War, fought between 1899 to 1902. The British had to contend with guerrilla-style warfare fought by small bands from the Boer republics. Africans were also involved in the war. However, the Afrikaners soon gained political control through elections, while placing Europeans into one large privileged bloc with political and economic power. By slicing and dicing, the Afrikaners claimed that Europeans constituted a plurality, when in fact they were only 20% of the population. Everything was segregated under apartheid, including cemeteries and small towns. Illustrating this segregation are photos of two communities in the Western Cape district. To the left is the affluent white town. To the right, and separated by open terrain, is the African or colored town, which provided domestic servants for the white elite. Africans were forcibly moved to the tribal homelands or reservations containing undesirable land. The map shows the resulting movement of people. But their labor was needed in the mines and cities. Townships to house the African, colored, and Asian workers were established near the mines and cities, often separating them from their families in the homelands. Two examples are Soweto near Johannesburg and Langa near Cape Town. Most African, colored, and Asians lived in squalor in these townships while providing a cheap labor force for the mines or as domestics. Even a lawyer like Nelson Madiba Mandela or a bishop like Desmond Tutu had to live modestly in Soweto. The two future Nobel Peace Prize winners lived on the same Soweto street. The primary resistance to apartheid was led by the African National Congress, or ANC. Their resistance began through non-violent acts of civil disobedience, but turned violent when the Afrikaner government refused to negotiate. Mandela organized the Spear of the Nation branch of the ANC. The Spears committed acts of sabotage, bombing infrastructure such as power plants. The targeting of physical structures was designed to avoid or lessen the loss of lives. Opposition to apartheid also came from the church through Anglican Bishop Desmond Tutu. Mandela and Tutu were the two best-known anti-apartheid witnesses, Mandela from prison and Tutu from the pulpit. Mandela was sentenced to life and sent to Robben Island. There he was incarcerated from 1964 until his release in 1990. At his trial, Mandela proclaimed,
"I have cherished the idea of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an idea which I hope to live for and to achieve, but if needs be, it is an idea for which I am prepared to die."
Robben Island, situated 10 miles from the mainland in the Atlantic Ocean within sight of Cape Town, was set aside for political prisoners. Welcome to Robben Island. You are now incarcerated for a few hours in an interactive museum. A former inmate, a freedom fighter, is your guide, providing a description of the prison and prison life.
Prison is designed to break one's spirit and destroy one's resolve. To do this, the authorities attempt to exploit every weakness, destroy every initiative, negate all signs of individuality, all with the idea of stamping out that spark which makes each of us human and each of us who we are. Nelson Mandela in Long Walk to Freedom.
A daily routine was the mindless task of breaking big rocks into small rocks with hand sledges. The sun's reflection off the white limestone caused permanent damage to Mandela's eyes. Vicious dogs were used as guards overseeing the prisoners. Despite inhumane treatment, Mandela kept his humanity and was able to offer reconciliation to his captors. He wrote,
"To make peace with an enemy, one must work with that enemy. And then that enemy becomes one's partner."
Although denied access to outside news, Mandela learned of the 1976 Soweto uprising, and he wrote these words,
"We who are confined within the gray walls of the Pretoria regime's prisons reach out to our people. With you we count those who have perished by means of gun and the hangman's rope. We salute all of you, the living, the injured, and the dead. For you have dared to rise up against the tyrant's might."
Outside Robben Island, Anglican Bishop Desmond Tutu led nonviolent resistance and spoke to the world, calling for a divestment movement against apartheid.
When I greeted Archbishop Tutu, I enveloped him in a great hug. Here was a man who inspired an entire nation with his words and his courage, who had revived the people's hope during the darkest of times. Nelson Mandela in Long Walk to Freedom.
Facing both international pressure from divestment and domestic protest, South African President F.W. de Klerk boldly arranged for Nelson Mandela's release. Soon after his release from prison, Nelson Mandela spoke to over 10,000 people packed into Cape Town's city square.
Friends, comrades, and fellow South Africans, I greet you in the name of peace, democracy, and freedom for all. I stand before you not as a prophet, but as a humble servant of you, the people. I therefore place the remaining years of my life in your hands. Any man or woman who abandons apartheid will be embraced in our struggle for a democratic, non-racial South Africa. We must do everything we can to persuade our white compatriots that a new, non-racial South Africa will be a better place for all. No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin, or his background, or his religion. People must learn to hate, and if they can learn to hate, they can also be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. Nelson Mandela, Long Walk to Freedom.
The willingness of President Mandela to reconcile with his former enemies and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission conducted by Archbishop Tutu allowed South Africa to overcome apartheid and advance toward Tutu's vision of a rainbow people. A new South Africa brought political freedom and civil rights for all. Nelson Mandela was revered by nearly all South Africans. Only the Afrikaners had difficulty fully accepting the new rainbow people concept. However, political freedom came to South Africa at a cost. While the ANC gained political power through elections, property and the economy remained in control of European South Africans. Today, South Africans of European descent own 72% of the land. Those of African descent own only 4% of the land. The modern affluence of downtown Cape Town and Johannesburg hide a huge, extreme economic gap between wealthy whites, a small black and colored elite, and the vast majority of South Africans. This wealth gap is among the highest in the world. Unemployment is close to 30%. The homes of the wealthy are gated and fenced. Crime is prevalent. There is freedom of movement in the new South Africa, but most Africans and many colored remain in the townships for economic or social cultural reasons. While most residents in the African townships are poor, many professional, middle and working class Africans have chosen to remain in Langa or Soweto. Poverty in the townships is compounded by immigration from other African nations. Most of the immigrants live in shanty towns outside the townships. The government has failed to fulfill its promises to improve life in the townships. The economic, psychological, and social damage done by apartheid remains and is hard to overcome. Despite economic poverty, the township is a vibrant community as shown in this Sunday visit to the Longa Township near Cape Town. On Sunday, the streets are full of action. After his presidential term, Nelson Mandela lived his last years in a comfortable home provided by the ANC. When Nelson Mandela died, he was mourned by a grateful nation. Stones with messages to Madiba were placed around his residence.
Madiba is free at last. You gave hope to the impoverished people of this world, and light to illuminate darkness. The gentle giant, they tagged you. Africa's David, some scoffed. Yes, suddenly you broke the shackles of apartheid from inside out. What a man, so kind, humble, courageous, loving, and forgiving. You feared no man, no African you feared. Madiba, Madiba, Nelson Mandela. We can't believe that you're gone. We learned to love you with all your shortcomings. For mortal you came, and mortal you returned. Though you couldn't legally vote, after 27 years of hard labor, your spirit was unbroken, your dignity intact. You became the president of South Africa.
Amanza! Oh wait. Amanza! Oh wait. All power to the people. All power to the people. All power to the people.
To the people of South Africa and the world who are watching, this is indeed a joyous night for the human spirit. This is your victory too. You helped end apartheid. You stood with us through the transition. I watched along with you all as the tens of thousands of our people stood patiently in long queues for many hours, some sleeping on the open ground overnight, waiting to cast this momentous vote. South Africa's heroes a legend across the generations. But it is you, the people, who are our true heroes. This is one of the most important moments in the life of our country. I stand before you filled with deep pride and joy. Pride in the ordinary, humble people of this country. You have shown such a calm, patient determination to reclaim this country as your own from the rooftops, free at last.
Amanza! Amanza! To the people.